Ladies and gentlemen, and I know that there is something in you that recognizes what is right. There is something deep within your heart that whispers to you when you see someone walking the correct path, when you see someone bearing the weight of their responsibility with dignity. You've heard this clearly. You've felt it when you watch someone rise above their suffering instead of being crushed by it. And yet, how easy it is to ignore that voice. How easy it is to shrink away from the burden of truth, to let the chaos of life dictate your actions rather than stepping forward into order. But if you listen closely, if you allow yourself to truly hear, you will recognize that the person who stands tall despite their struggles, the one who speaks the truth despite the cost, is someone worthy of admiration. It is not comfort that defines a great life. It is not ease or the absence of suffering. It is meaning. And meaning is found in the responsibility you take upon yourself and the sacrifices you are willing to make to uphold something greater than yourself. If you do not carry the load that is yours to bear, then you will suffer anyway, but in a manner that is bitter, resentful, and destructive. You heard this clearly about that person in your heart, the one who stands firm against adversity, the one who does not flinch in the face of truth, the one who embraces the responsibility of existence rather than fleeing from it. That is the person you should strive to become. Personal responsibility is not just an abstract concept or a trivial obligation. It is the foundation upon which a meaningful life is built. It is the voluntary acceptance of duty, the recognition that your actions, your words, and even your thoughts shape not only your own destiny, but also the fabric of the world around you. It is an undeniable truth that the weight of existence cannot be avoided. You will carry something whether you choose to or not. The only real choice you have is whether you will carry it willingly, with strength and purpose, or whether you will let it crush you under the sheer weight of avoidance and neglect. To take responsibility is to acknowledge that your life is your own, that no one else is coming to rescue you, and that every excuse, every captor you blame is merely a smokescreen, the reality of your own potential. There are people who spend their entire lives waiting for the right circumstances, waiting for someone to fix their problems, waiting for the world to align in their favor. But waiting is a passive act, and passivity is the precursor to despair. It is through action, through responsibility, that life becomes rich with meaning. Now, responsibility is not easy. In fact, it is difficult, perhaps the most difficult thing a person can embrace. It demands discipline, it demands sacrifice, and it demands the willingness to face suffering without resentment. It means recognizing your own faults and working to correct them instead of blaming others. It means understanding that if your life is a mess, it is your job to clean it up. And it means carrying yourself in such a way that your existence becomes a force for order rather than chaos, for growth rather than decay. But why should you bother? Why not simply drift through life, blaming your circumstances, indulging in short-term pleasures, and avoiding the weight of real responsibility? Because that path, though easy in the short term, leads only to misery. If you refuse to take responsibility for your life, someone else will take it for you, and they may not have your best interests at heart. Worse, you will become bitter, resentful of those who have taken control of their own lives, resentful of the world, resentful of existence itself. And resentment breeds nothing but suffering for yourself and those around you. Contrast that with the person who embraces responsibility fully. That person does not seek an easy life, they seek a meaningful one. They recognize that hardship is an inevitable part of existence, but instead of crumbling under its weight, they use it as fuel for growth. They set their house in order before they criticize the world. They do not run from their fears, but confront them head on. They do not shrink from the truth, but speak it, no matter how difficult. And because of that, they become stronger. They become someone others can rely on. They become someone who, when they speak, others listen because their words are backed by action, by discipline, by integrity. Imagine what the world would be like if more people took personal responsibility seriously. Imagine a world where every individual held themselves to the highest standard possible, where every person sought to improve themselves instead of tearing others down. Imagine a world where people owned their mistakes, where they took accountability for their actions, where they built instead of destroyed. That world would be unrecognizable compared to the one we live in now, where so many prefer to complain rather than correct, to blame rather than build, to seek comfort rather than character. Responsibility is not just about personal success, it is about moral obligation. If you are capable of being better, then you have a duty to be better. If you are capable of carrying more, then you have an obligation to do so. Not just for yourself, but for your family, for your community, for the world itself. Because when one person stands tall, when one person carries their burden with dignity, they inspire others to do the same. And that is how true change occurs, not from the top down, not from policies or empty slogans, but from the individual outward. So take responsibility. Do not wait. Do not look for excuses. Do not assume someone else will fix what is broken. Look at yourself, truly look and ask, what can I do today to be better than I was yesterday? What burden am I avoiding that I need to lift? What truth am I ignoring that I need to confront? The answers are there, but only if you are willing to listen. And once you hear them, once you truly hear them, there is only one thing left to do. Truth is not merely a collection of facts, nor is it a convenient tool to be wielded only when it serves one's immediate interests. Truth is something deeper, something foundational, something that stands at the very core of a well-lived life. It is the structure upon which meaning is built, the bedrock upon which a person must stand if they are to find purpose in the vast and often chaotic world. And meaning is not something you stumble upon by accident. It is not given freely. It must be earned, uncovered, and pursued with deliberate effort, with an honest heart, and with the willingness to face the consequences of what is real rather than what is comfortable. The absence of truth is not neutrality, it is corruption. When you avoid the truth, when you distort it, when you silence it, you do not simply remain stagnant. You sink. Lies breed weakness, and weakness breeds suffering. A person who refuses to face the truth about themselves, about their actions, about the world, does not remain blissfully ignorant. They become resentful, bitter, and lost. And when enough people abandon the truth, when entire cultures decide that comfort is more important than reality, the result is catastrophic. Societies do not thrive in the absence of truth. They decay, they crumble, they give way to deceit, manipulation, and ultimately tyranny. But the pursuit of truth, though difficult, is what grants life its richness. It is what makes meaning possible. You cannot construct something worthwhile on a foundation of falsehoods, because reality will not conform to your wishes. It does not bend to convenience. You can lie to yourself for a time, but the consequences of those lies will always come for you. If you pretend your bad habits do not matter, they will eventually consume you. If you ignore your responsibilities, they will pile up until the weight is unbearable. If you refuse to acknowledge your own faults, you will become a prisoner of them. The only way forward, the only way to carve out something real and valuable in this world, is to be honest, brutally honest, first and foremost with yourself. But honesty is painful. It is not simply a matter of speaking the truth to others. That is the easy part. The real difficulty lies in looking at yourself with clear eyes and asking, where have I failed? Where am I weak? Where am I allowing myself to be ruled by fear instead of courage? These are terrifying questions because the answers are rarely flattering. They require you to confront the very aspects of yourself that you would rather ignore. But in that confrontation, there is the potential for transformation. Because the moment you acknowledge what is broken, you create the possibility of fixing it. And in that process, in that continual pursuit of what is true, you begin to uncover meaning. Meaning is not something external. It is not wealth. It is not status. It is not fleeting pleasure. Meaning emerges when you align yourself with the truth, when you take responsibility for your own existence, when you walk the path that you know deep down is the right one. That path is never easy. It requires sacrifice. It demands discipline. It forces you to let go of the comfortable illusions that shield you from reality. But in exchange, it offers something far greater, a life of purpose. A life that is not aimless, not hollow, but filled with the deep and abiding knowledge that you are living in accordance with what is real, and that your suffering, because suffering is inevitable, is not meaningless, but necessary for growth. People seek meaning in all the wrong places. They chase pleasure, assuming that if they can simply accumulate enough enjoyable moments, their lives will be fulfilling. But pleasure is fleeting. It comes and goes like the wind, leaving nothing behind. It is a pale imitation of meaning, and those who build their lives around it inevitably find themselves empty. Others seek meaning in external validation, in the approval of others, in the illusion of status. But status is an illusion. It is given and taken by the whims of society, and those who rely on it for their sense of worth are ever at the mercy of forces beyond their control. True meaning comes from something deeper. It comes from striving toward what is good despite the difficulty. It comes from carrying your burdens willingly, from facing hardship with courage rather than resentment. It comes from aligning yourself with truth, even when that truth is painful, even when it demands more from you than you think you can give. And when you do that, when you truly dedicate yourself to truth, to responsibility, to discipline, you find that meaning is not something you must chase. It is something that emerges naturally, something that fills the spaces where deceit and despair once thrived. So if you want a meaningful life, you must commit yourself to the truth. You must abandon the comfort of lies. You must be willing to see yourself clearly, to speak with integrity, to act with purpose. And when you do, you will find that though the road is difficult, though the weight is heavy, though the cost is high, the reward is something that no amount of falsehood, no amount of avoidance, no amount of fleeting pleasure could ever replace. Life is a delicate balance between two fundamental forces, chaos and order. These forces are not merely abstract ideas, they are the very structure of existence itself. They are present in every moment, in every decision, in every challenge a person faces. One represents stability, predictability, and structure. The other represents uncertainty, transformation, and the unknown. And between them, between the safety of what is familiar and the terror of what is not, is where meaning is found. Order is necessary. It is what allows society to function, what allows individuals to build, grow, and flourish. It is the routine that structures our days, the traditions that bind communities together, the moral frameworks that guide our decisions. Without order, there is no security. There is no progress. There is only anarchy and aimlessness. A person who refuses order, a person who rejects discipline, responsibility, and structure may feel free for a time, but that freedom is an illusion. Because without order, without a guiding principle, without a framework that gives shape to existence, a person is left drifting, untethered, unable to find solid ground. And a life without stability is a life that inevitably spirals into suffering. But too much order, too much rigidity can be just as destructive. A world of absolute order is a world that does not change, that does not allow for growth. It is a world where innovation is stifled, where the unpredictable nature of life is denied, where individuals are suffocated under weight of unyielding rules and expectations. When order becomes too dominant, it becomes oppressive. It crushes the spirit. It eliminates possibility. It refuses to acknowledge the necessity of change. A person who clings too tightly to order, who refuses to embrace the unknown, becomes stagnant. They become fearful of anything that challenges their worldview, anything that disrupts their carefully constructed reality. And in doing so, they cut themselves off from the very thing that allows life to be dynamic and meaningful, the transformative power of chaos. Chaos is terrifying, but it is also essential. It is the force that disrupts what is taught, that forces growth, that breaks apart outdated structures so that new ones can emerge. It is the uncertainty that accompanies every new opportunity, every major decision, every step into the unknown. It is the destruction of old habits, the challenge of facing one's deepest fears, the willingness to accept that the world is not always what one wishes it to be. Without chaos, there is no change, there is no adaptation, there is no progress. But chaos, left unchecked, is pure destruction. It is suffering without meaning, hardship without purpose. It is what happens when a person abandons all responsibility, when they reject all structure, when they surrender entirely to impulse and whim. Chaos in its rawest form is addiction, despair, nihilism. It is the abyss that consumes those who refuse to set their lives in order, those who reject responsibility, those who refuse to acknowledge the necessity of discipline. A life ruled by chaos is a life of fear, of instability, of never knowing where the next step will lead. And a society ruled by chaos is one that collapses, one that descends into violence, into meaninglessness, into ruin. The goal, then, is not to eliminate chaos or order, but to balance them. A meaningful life is one that exists at the edge between these two forces, where order provides the structure necessary for stability, but chaos provides the necessary disruption that allows for growth. It is within that balance that the most profound aspects of human existence emerge. It is the student who must leave the comfort of childhood to step into the uncertainty of adulthood. It is the artist who must break free from rigid convention to create something new and powerful. It is the individual who must let go of outdated beliefs to evolve into someone stronger, wiser, more capable. But maintaining that balance is no simple task. It requires constant effort. It requires the discipline to impose order upon oneself, to develop routines, to embrace responsibility, to build something stable and lasting. But it also requires the courage to step into the unknown, to take risks, to face fears, to allow oneself to be transformed by experience. A person who is too comfortable, too entrenched in their routines, too unwilling to venture beyond what is known may feel secure, but they will not grow. They will not become more than they are. And a person who is too reckless, who abandons all order in pursuit of momentary excitement, will find themselves lost, overwhelmed, unable to build anything that lasts. The challenge then is to find the right place between these two forces, to build structure but not become trapped by it, to embrace change but not be consumed by it, to walk that fine line where transformation is possible, where stability provides the foundation, but chaos provides the potential for something greater. That is the space where meaning is found. That is the place where individuals become who they are meant to be. It is not an easy path, but it is the only path that leads to true growth, true strength, and a life that is not just lived, but lived fully. Life is suffering. That is an undeniable truth, and to ignore it is to blind yourself to reality. You will face pain. You will encounter hardship. You will be betrayed, disappointed, and wounded sometimes by others, sometimes by the sheer unpredictability of existence itself. The world is not fair, and it never has been. No one escapes unscathed. No one walks through life without burdens. The only real question is, how will you respond? Will you allow suffering to break you, to turn you bitter and resentful, to reduce you to a state of hopelessness? Or will you endure, strengthen yourself, and rise in the face of it? Resilience is not something that appears out of nowhere. It is not a gift bestowed upon the fortunate. It is cultivated, is forged in the fire of hardship, built through struggle, earned through the conscious decision to stand firm rather than collapse. And it is precisely in suffering that you have the opportunity to become stronger. Because if hardship is inevitable, then so too is the chance to grow from it. But resilience is not just about survival. It is not merely the ability to endure suffering, it is the ability to take suffering and transform it into something meaningful. It is about refusing to let pain define you in a way that makes you weaker. When you are knocked down, when life shatters the plans you had so carefully laid out, when everything feels as though it is crumbling around you, you have a choice. You can wallow in despair, cursing your misfortune, or you can take responsibility for what is within your control and push forward. People often mistake resilience for simple toughness, as though it were merely a matter of gritting your teeth and bearing whatever comes your way. But true resilience is deeper than that. It is not just endurance, it is adaptation. It is the ability to learn from hardship, to extract wisdom from pain, to emerge from suffering not just intact but improved. If you are willing to pay attention, if you are willing to truly face the difficulties that confront you rather than running from them, you will find that every hardship contains a lesson. Every setback contains knowledge. Every moment of suffering is an opportunity to become more than you were before. But to do that, you must first accept responsibility, because hardship alone does not automatically make you stronger. It can just as easily destroy you if you let it. If you choose to see yourself as a victim of fate, if you decide that your suffering is unjust and that the world owes you something in return, you will find only bitterness. And bitterness leads nowhere. It eats away at you. It poisons your mind. It turns you against yourself and against the world, convincing you that there is no point in striving, no point in hoping, no point in trying. That is the path of resentment, and it is a slow descent into despair. But there is another path. It is the path of responsibility, the path of resilience, the path that says, no matter what happens to me, I will not allow it to break me. I will not let my suffering make me small. I will not surrender to hopelessness. I will stand. I will bear my burden. And in doing so, I will make myself stronger. It is not easy. It requires discipline. It requires self-reflection. It requires the willingness to acknowledge your own weaknesses and to work tirelessly to overcome them. But if you take that path, you will find something remarkable. You will discover that you are capable of withstanding far more than you ever imagined. You will find that the things you once thought were impossible, the obstacles you once believed were insurmountable, are nothing more than challenges to be met and conquered. And you will find that in facing suffering with courage and determination, you carve out a life of deep and lasting meaning. Because the world does not reward those who fall apart in the face of adversity. It rewards those who rise. It rewards those who take their suffering and use it as fuel for something greater. It rewards those who refuse to let hardship turn them into something weak and broken, but instead allow it to forge them into something resilient, something capable, something powerful. And the truth is, you already know this. You have seen it in others. You have felt it in moments when you stood firm against the storm. You know that the greatest figures in history, the people we admire most, the ones who inspire us, are not those who avoided hardship. They are the ones who faced it, the ones who stood in the fire and refused to be consumed by it. So what will you do when hardship comes? And will you let it define you in a way that weakens you? Or will you take up the responsibility of becoming stronger? Will you be crushed under the weight of your suffering? Or will you carry it with dignity, with resolve, with the knowledge that in doing so, you are becoming someone worthy of admiration, someone capable of not only enduring but thriving? The choice is yours. And in that choice, in that decision to embrace responsibility, to face suffering without surrender, to stand up straight with your shoulders back and meet the trials of life with courage, you will find the key to resilience. You will find the strength to overcome. And you will find, perhaps to your surprise, that in doing so, you have not only survived, but you have become something greater than you ever thought possible. The individual is the fundamental unit of society, the foundation upon which everything else is built. It is the individual who thinks, who speaks, who acts, who creates. It is the individual who bears responsibility, who confronts suffering, who strives toward the good. Without strong individuals, there is no strong family, no strong community, no strong nation. It is individuals who lift societies up, who challenge corruption, who bring forth new ideas, who push the boundaries of what is possible. And yet, in the modern world, there is a growing tendency to dismiss the power of the individual, to insist that people are mere products of their environment, that they are powerless against larger forces, that their actions and choices do not matter in the grand scheme of things. That idea is not just false, it is dangerous. Because the moment an individual believes they have no power, they become weak. And when enough individuals believe that, society collapses into collective weakness. It is far easier to believe that responsibility lies elsewhere, that the problems of the world are the fault of governments, corporations, institutions, or abstract social forces. But that belief is an abdication of personal responsibility. It is an excuse to do nothing. And when people do nothing, when they refuse to take responsibility for their own actions, for their own thoughts, for their own development, they become bitter, resentful, and easily manipulated. They surrender their autonomy to whatever collective movement happens to be shouting the loudest. They trade their own agency for the false comfort of belonging to a group that tells them who to blame for their problems. But a group cannot think. A group cannot act with moral responsibility. Only an individual can do that. And history makes this clear. Every great advancement, every moral revolution, every true change that has ever occurred in the world began with an individual, one person, who decided to take responsibility, who decided to speak the truth, even when it was difficult, who refused to be swallowed up by the mob. The greatest figures in history, those who fought for justice, who built civilizations, who stood against tyranny, were individuals who understood that they were not powerless, that their choices mattered. They did not wait for permission to act. They did not wait for someone else to fix things. They took up the burden themselves, but with power comes responsibility. To be an individual in the truest sense, to be someone who stands apart, who thinks critically, who acts with integrity, requires great effort. It requires discipline. It requires the willingness to bear the weight of existence without shrinking from it. And that is why so many people abandon their individuality in favor of conformity. It is easier to follow orders than to think for oneself. It is easier to blame others than to take responsibility. It is easier to blend in than to stand up. But the easy path leads nowhere. The individual who refuses to think, who refuses to act, who refuses to take responsibility for their own life, does not remain neutral. They become weak. And weak individuals create weak societies that crumble under pressure, that fall into corruption, that descend into chaos or tyranny. Because when individuals refuse to take responsibility, that responsibility does not simply vanish. It is seized by those who are all too eager to dictate how others should live, how they should think, what they should believe. And once that happens, freedom is lost. But the alternative, the path of the strong individual, is one that leads to meaning, to growth, to a life of purpose. When an individual takes responsibility for their own existence, when they decide to stand up straight with their shoulders back and face the challenges of life head on, they become something more than they were before. They become a force to be reckoned with. They develop wisdom. They cultivate courage. They learn to navigate the complexities of the world without falling into despair or resentment. And in doing so, they become the kind of person who can truly make a difference, not just in their own life, but in the lives of those around them. Because the power of the individual does not stop at the individual. A person who takes responsibility for their own existence becomes a better friend, a better spouse, a better parent, a better leader. Their strength radiates outward. They set an example for others. They inspire others to rise to the occasion, to take responsibility for their own lives, to strive towards something greater. And when enough individuals do that, society itself becomes stronger. So the question is this: will you take up the responsibility of being an individual? Will you refuse to let yourself be defined by the expectations of others, by the pressure to conform, by the narrative that tells you that your actions do not matter? Will you choose to think for yourself, to speak the truth, to act with courage even when it is difficult? Because if you do, you will discover something remarkable. You will discover that you are far stronger than you ever imagined. You will discover that your choices, your words, your actions have far-reaching consequences. And you will discover that in taking responsibility for your own existence, you are not only improving your own life, you are contributing to something far greater. You are helping to build a world that is stronger, freer, and more just. The power of the individual is real. It is the most fundamental force in human history, and it is a force that resides within you. The only question is whether you will choose to wield it. Words shape reality. They define the way people think, structure their perceptions, and determine how they act. The power of words is immense, and yet people often speak carelessly, without considering the weight of what they say. They treat language as though it is inconsequential, as though words are mere sounds fleeting and without consequence. But this is not true. Words are powerful beyond measure. They can build people up, inspire them, and set them on a path toward greatness. Or they can tear people down, sow doubt, and shatter their confidence. They can reveal truth, or they can be used to deceive. They can guide a person toward order and clarity, or they can plunge them into chaos and confusion. This is why truth matters, because words, when wielded dishonestly, have the capacity to manipulate, to distort, to control. When people speak falsely, whether to themselves or to others, they create a false world. They erode trust, both in themselves and in those around them. They make it impossible to navigate reality effectively. Lies corrupt not only individual relationships, but entire societies. A society that is built on deception, that tolerates dishonesty, that encourages people to say what is convenient rather than what is true, is a society that is on the path to collapse. Because if people cannot trust the words of those around them, if they cannot trust the institutions that govern them, if they cannot even trust themselves to be honest in their own thoughts and speech, then they lose their grip on reality itself. But words do not only have power in the external world, they shape the inner world as well. The way a person speaks to themselves, the words they choose to describe their own experience, their own abilities, their own worth determines the course of their life. A person who constantly tells themselves that they are weak, that they are incapable, that they are doomed to fail, will inevitably make those statements true. Because words create the framework through which reality is interpreted. If a person tells themselves that their suffering is meaningless, that their life has no purpose, that nothing they do matters, then they will act accordingly. And the result of that will be misery, but the opposite is also true. A person who speaks truthfully, who refuses to let their words be tainted by cynicism or despair, can build themselves into something stronger. The person who tells themselves that they are capable, that they have the ability to bear the burdens of existence, that they can improve, will find that they can in fact do all those things. Because belief is not merely a passive state of mind, it is an active force that shapes behavior. And behavior over time shapes reality. This is why precision in speech matters. It is not enough to simply say things, it is necessary to say things clearly, truthfully, and with careful intent. When a person speaks vaguely, when they allow their words to be clouded by confusion or dishonesty, they make it difficult to act effectively. They make it impossible to think properly. Clarity in speech leads to clarity in thought, and clarity in thought leads to clarity in action. But vague, imprecise speech leads to imprecise thought, and imprecise thought leads to chaos. And this applies not only to individuals, but to entire cultures. When a society allows language to become corrupted, when words lose their meaning, when people begin to use language as a tool for deception, rather than as a means of communicating truth, that society begins to unravel. Because without clear, honest speech, people cannot solve problems. They cannot engage in meaningful dialogue. They cannot trust one another. And when trust is lost, everything falls apart. This is why it is so important to choose words carefully, to speak only what is true, to refuse to allow convenience or social pressure to dictate what is said. Because every word spoken has an impact, whether immediate or delayed. It shapes perception. It influences thought. It determines action. A person who speaks carelessly, who allows themselves to lie, whether to protect their own pride, to avoid conflict, or to manipulate others, will eventually find that their words have built a prison around them. They will find themselves trapped in a world of their own making, a world where nothing is clear, where no one can be trusted, where even they themselves cannot distinguish truth from falsehood. But a person who speaks with honesty, with clarity, with precision, builds something else entirely. They build trust. They build strength. They build a foundation upon which they can stand with confidence. And they create the conditions necessary for real progress, both for themselves and for those around them. So the choice is this: will you treat your words as meaningless, as though they have no consequence, as though they can be thrown around carelessly without impact? Or will you recognize their weight, their power, their immense ability to shape reality? Because once you understand the true nature of words, you will realize that every time you speak, you are shaping the world of those around you, the world of the future. And that is no small responsibility.